In Beijing, what is happening around Greenland is perceived as a rare and almost ideal gift that could not have been obtained through diplomacy, economic pressure, or even military rivalry. According to sources close to Chinese analytical centers and foreign policy structures, the current escalation has become the most advantageous development for China in recent decades because the United States is undermining the foundations of the Western world with its own hands. The split within NATO amid Donald Trump's aggressive rhetoric toward Greenland, the preparation of reciprocal tariffs between the US and Europe, and the threat of an economic war between former allies are all seen in Beijing as confirmation of what Chinese strategists have been saying for years. Western unity rested not on solid values, but on convenience and fear, and now this framework is beginning to crumble. Closed Chinese reports emphasize that Trump is making one of the greatest geopolitical mistakes of modern times, systematically underestimating China and overestimating the ability of the United States to impose its will on allies without consequences. Chinese analysts are convinced that the destruction of transatlantic ties will inevitably lead to a leadership vacuum, and that Beijing will be the only force capable of filling it. Europe, as they believe in China, is not ideologically hostile to the PRC. It was simply embedded in the American system of security and economics. And if the US ceases to act as a guarantor of stability, European capitals will begin to look for an alternative. Beijing is confident that if China offers Europe economic and political support at the right moment, a significant part of European elites will turn without hesitation toward pragmatic cooperation, discarding previous dogmas. This is precisely why Chinese diplomacy in recent weeks has acted deliberately calmly and rationally, avoiding sharp statements and direct confrontation, allowing the United States to continue destroying its own authority. The particular cynicism of the situation, as insiders emphasize, lies in the fact that Donald Trump publicly declares the need to seize Greenland before Russia or China do, while the main paradox is that until recently, China did not consider Greenland a priority target for expansion at all. Yes, Beijing has interests in the Arctic, including trade routes, resources, and long-term logistics. But China's strategic focus has been and remains centered on Taiwan and the Asia-Pacific region. That is why in Chinese analytical circles, what is happening is called a gift without a request. The United States itself has moved the Arctic and Greenland to the center of world politics, thereby opening up new opportunities for China that it had not planned to use so early. And now, according to sources, having realized the scale of the window of opportunity that has opened, Beijing has begun to act. This is not about direct expansion or demonstrative steps that could unite the West. On the contrary, China is acting subtly and with calculation. According to insiders, Beijing is considering a scenario of limited Chinese naval presence in northern latitudes and areas adjacent to Arctic routes, not as an act of aggression, but as a presence of interest. The goal of this step, as sources emphasize, is not the defense of Greenland and not confrontation with the United States, but the creation of a sense of external pressure that would push Donald Trump toward sharper and more impulsive actions. In Beijing, they understand Trump's psychology and are counting on the fact that a demonstration of Chinese interest will force him to accelerate decision-making, thereby finally undermining Western unity and justifying in the eyes of the world any subsequent steps by China. For Beijing, this is a unique chance, without entering into direct confrontation, to ensure that its main competitor destroys the system that for decades restrained the growth of Chinese influence. That is why what is happening around Greenland is viewed in China not as a crisis, but as a strategic opportunity of historic scale, the possibility in which the United States loses its status as an unconditional hegemon. Europe finds itself searching for a new center of power, and China is able to occupy the vacated space without firing a single shot. And judging by how events are unfolding, Beijing is confident that such a chance does not come often and will not be missed. Against this backdrop, Chinese strategic circles increasingly emphasize that the key element of the current situation is not speed but timing, and it is precisely here that Beijing feels its main advantage. Chinese analysts proceed from the assumption that the Western world is now in a phase of internal overload, when each new decision by Washington deepens the split rather than resolves it. According to insiders, Beijing is closely monitoring the reactions of European capitals to American tariffs, rhetoric around Greenland, and threats of forceful pressure, because these reactions reveal how deeply trust in the United States has been undermined. China's strategy is based on a simple calculation: not to become the initiator of a crisis, but to carefully expand its own presence where a vacuum is created by the Americans themselves. In this sense, any talk of Chinese expansion in the Arctic is viewed in Beijing as a consequence rather than a cause of what is happening. If the United States and its allies had supported stability for decades, China saw no need to rush. But when the guarantor of stability itself turns into a source of chaos, the logic of restraint changes. Closed reports emphasize that even a limited appearance of Chinese vessels in northern latitudes has not a military but a symbolic meaning, demonstrating to the world that the era of exclusive U.S. control over global spaces is coming to an end. At the same time, Beijing carefully avoids steps that could be interpreted as a direct provocation, allowing Trump to shape the narrative of threat himself and thereby push allies even further away from Washington. Chinese diplomats, according to sources, are already working with European partners in closed formats, offering economic cooperation, investments, and long-term contracts without political ultimatums, thus creating a contrast with the American model of pressure. For Europe, tired of U.S. unpredictability, this approach looks increasingly attractive, even if it is not yet spoken of publicly. In Beijing, they believe that the real battle for global leadership is won not by loud statements, but by patience and the ability to exploit an opponent's mistakes. And this is precisely what makes the current crisis around Greenland so valuable from China's point of view. It destroys old alliances without requiring Beijing to assume responsibility for their collapse. Analysts emphasize that if the United States continues down the path of escalation, China will be able to gradually establish itself as an alternative center of attraction without declaring a change of hegemon, but allowing the world to make this choice on its own. In this logic, Greenland becomes not a target but a catalyst, a point where American impulsiveness and Chinese calculation collide, and the outcome of this collision is determined not by fleet strength but by the ability to impose the rules of the game. That is why Beijing is confident that time is now working in China's favor, and every new sharp move by Washington only brings closer the moment when the global system finally restructures itself, cementing the transition from American dominance to a more complex and multipolar reality. In this logic, Chinese strategists increasingly emphasize that the main resource of the current moment is neither military power nor economic pressure, but the loss of trust in the former leader of the global system. According to insiders, Beijing understands that once allies begin to doubt the predictability of the United States, the process of realignment becomes self-sustaining and can no longer be stopped by statements or symbolic concessions alone. This is precisely why China avoids loud victory declarations, allowing events to unfold in such a way that each subsequent decision by Washington looks like confirmation of the Allies' worst fears. Closed assessments note that even if the crisis around Greenland does not lead to a direct force-based scenario, it has already fulfilled its key function by showing the world that American leadership no longer guarantees stability. For China, this means an accelerated transition to an era in which influence is measured not by the ability to impose decisions, but by the ability to offer an alternative. And this, according to Chinese analysts, is the main outcome of what is happening. It is not China that challenges the United States, but the United States itself that is yielding space, which Beijing is ready to occupy step by step, without abrupt moves, turning the crisis around Greenland into yet another milestone on the path toward the final redistribution of global power.